Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheryl Ozinsky. Right now, I'd like to give you all a big hug. But we know we can't do that. So I hope you've brushed your teeth. I hope you're out of your pajamas. Here goes. 15 years ago, my partner Kaz and I were attacked in our home. I realized that I could do one of two things. I could either bury my head in the sand, or I could do something to make my community better. I joined a passionate group of neighbors that began the process of taking back our streets. We worked collaboratively with the City of Cape Town and the police and managed to make our neighborhood cleaner, safer, more walkable and livable. But we all know that safety alone doesn't build community. A disused, neglected bowling green that was once a farm was converted to a community food garden, a place where people could meet, pick their own veg, exchange ideas, learn about food, and connect. We also sold a few vegetables from the park next to the garden, and the idea of a market was born. 8 years later, the Oranjezicht City Farm Market at Granger Bay at the V&A waterfront is a gathering and meeting place, but importantly, it's also an alternative grocery provider, offering a shortened supply chain between farmers and consumers. By choosing to eat what nature is offering, grown or produced locally in a transparent supply chain, consumers can support a new approach to food, a new relationship with cooking and eating that can be found in consuming responsibly.
What was the state of formal food retail in South Africa before the COVID-19 pandemic? And where were things headed? And how did the farmers market fit into this picture?
Right, well, those are a lot of questions. I'll start first with a formal retail market in South Africa. Well, we all know that South African food retail is dominated by four main players: Pick n Pay, Shoprite, Checkers, Spar, and Woolworths. I hope they're paying me for this bit of advertising. And civil society activists are concerned that while supermarkets have lowered the cost of food because they buy in such bulk, they are also increasing the risk of health-related diseases by providing calorie-dense, nutrient-poor, unhealthy food. Supermarkets are predominantly supplied by large-scale industrial agriculture. We know that that is ecologically unsustainable. Large-scale agriculture reduces soil health and biodiversity. It contributes to the pollution of our waterways and makes a significant contribution to climate change. And our food system is further dominated by a few large farms, which sell their product to a few large processing companies, who in turn sell that food to a few large supermarket chains. So domination all around. About 20% of the 30,000 commercial farms in South Africa produce 80% of our food. So 20% of the 30,000 commercial farms in South Africa, Daniel, produce 80% of our food.
Wow.
So these big food companies are extremely efficient at delivering cheap food, but they're not efficient in terms of delivering food that is healthy. Interestingly, and you'll see on the screen some other kind of retail offerings, despite the fact that supermarkets account for approximately 68% of all food sales in South Africa, they make up a small percentage of all food retail outlets. And the informal food economy comprises a dense and diverse network of informal markets, suppliers, transporters, mobile traders, hawkers, retailers, street food vendors, making food much more accessible and affordable in low-income areas. Where were things headed? You asked me that.
Yes.
So,
before the pandemic.
Before the pandemic, exactly. So I watched Jane Battersby Leonard's introductory talk. And if you had, you would have seen that one of the graphics that she used really sort of punched home for me. She showed a graphic, the one in the middle of my screen now, of the dramatic growth of supermarkets in Cape Town over a 20-year period. I think the first is 1994. The second one is 2013. And we can just see how many supermarkets we have in the greater Cape Town area. And in fact, South Africa has the 6th highest number of supermarket of shopping malls in the world. And often supermarkets are anchor tenants, and around them we see a proliferation of fast food outlets. Many South Africans can only afford to buy junk food or processed food that's high in carbohydrates and sugar, with little nutritional value that you need in order to be healthy and happy. Fast foods, snack foods, sugary drinks, what has happened is they've kickstarted an obesity epidemic that's contributed to a rapid rise in diet-related diseases. And these are found in more affluent communities, but especially in poor and vulnerable populations. And that's why we're suffering so much from the COVID pandemic. In 2008, the African Food Security Network, AFSUN, they sampled low-income households in South Africa, and they found that 80% of them are moderately or severely food insecure. What does that mean? That means that they don't have physical and economic access to nutritious food that meets their dietary requirements for an active and healthy life. So it doesn't mean that we don't have food. We don't have nutritious food. 80% of South Africans are moderately or severely food insecure. And 14 million people in this country go to bed hungry every night. That's a shocking statistic. Probably the biggest problem when it comes to food security in South Africa is employment. That's another thing. The present food system isn't a significant generator of jobs, and this is driving poor people off the land. And we all know how much employment we need in South Africa right now. So you also asked, Daniel, how a farmer's market fitted into this picture.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you now, once the small disused Oranjezicht bowling green was dramatically transformed into a vibrant market garden, we all realized that we needed to move beyond Oranjezicht. And if we wanted to play a purposeful and meaningful role in South Africa, we needed to address deeper issues, such as food insecurity, food distribution, job creation. As a first step along the journey, we established the Oranjezicht City Farm Market to offer smarter, healthier alternatives to the traditional supermarket model by reinstating small farms as the food source for the community. We started forging close relationships with local fruit and veg farmers. You can see some of them on the screen. And we provided the services and the infrastructure for the distribution of fresh, mainly organic, high-quality produce to consumers. Our mission was to try and ensure that small farmers regain their economic foothold in the marketplace, and that the knowledge and choice of local food becomes the norm, not the exception, as it is at the moment. And now that we understand more about the sustainability of running a food market, we've been at the V&A, for example, for 5 years, our vision is to scale this model, to assist communities to establish food markets in their own neighborhoods across the city. So imagine if we had food gardens across the city, if we had food markets across the city, that people of all demographics and all economic opportunities, they could buy food from these food markets supplying local food. Daniel?
Oh, thank you for that. I particularly like the work you are doing with the food farmers market. And so then the COVID-19 pandemic set in. And so I want to ask, how did the pandemic affect your business? And what have been the broader effect of the pandemic on formal food retail generally?
Right, again, quite a lot of questions. When the pandemic first hit, Daniel, it was like a bomb going off. It was absolutely terrible. We closed the market for 5 weeks, which had a considerable impact on the 80-odd traders who relied on the market as a platform to sell their bread or their meat or their fish or their olives or their cheese and their prepared food. Collectively, around 300 people were employed at the market by ourselves and our traders. So you can imagine the impact on all of them. And like many other businesses, the market took a big hit financially, and we had to start using our savings to continue to operate, just to pay our rental and to pay our staff and to pay the insurance. And there was another challenge, of course, our small farmer suppliers. We literally have about 30 small farmers supplying the market. They literally had organic beets and carrots ready for harvesting with no one to sell them to. Many of them also supplied restaurants, but these restaurants were now closed. So we knew that we had to continue supporting our farmers somehow so that we would maintain our supply chain, because if they stopped farming altogether, then our business would be lost. So we rallied. We built an online platform in a week, and we got consumers to purchase veg boxes, and they could drive by the market to collect. But this initiative was closed down by SAPS, by the police. We then donated the produce and we dusted ourselves off. We then collaborated with a bigger business who had better facilities and refrigeration for packing online orders, but this didn't work out. So all through this time, we were researching what was happening with farmers markets around the world, and we noticed that some of them were open, and we started lobbying local and provincial government to allow the market to remain open for essential grocery shopping. Because if the supermarkets could sell Coke, we couldn't understand why we couldn't sell a cabbage. So argued that we could keep staff, traders, and customers safe. We were an outdoor setting, and we were listening to experts saying that outdoors was much safer. We could ensure social distancing. Eventually, we received knowledge that we could apply for an informal traders permit for the market and for all our 80 traders. We received all those, and after demonstrating to SAPS that we had all the safety protocols in place, we opened the market on Saturdays only during level 5. That was April the 25th. We were very scared. For the next couple of weeks, we lost our mojo, we lost our confidence, but we got that back. And whilst normality is still a long way off, the goal for us always has remained the same: help farmers and small business owners weather the storm and continue to have a platform to sell their products. Since social distancing rules have come into play at the market, we host a fraction of the amount of traffic that we would otherwise see. We've had to adapt, we've had to manage the expectations of our traders, but things are looking up. As of September, we're going to open on Sundays as well. And we hope that as the pandemic subsides and as the curve flattens, we're going to see more and more people out and about wearing masks, taking precautions. Another project that we got involved in with the V&A waterfront and restaurants at the V&A was to supply our farmers organic produce to these restaurants. Many of them are now closed. And what they do is they chop, slice, dice, and they cook our farmers healthy vegetables into nutritious meals. They get decanted into hundreds of 25-liter plastic buckets, and they get distributed 3 times a week by ladles of love to the beneficiaries in the Cape Flats to help our children grow. So we say that Eric's carrots don't only take 90 days to grow, they keep growing even after they're harvested.
That's very interesting. The second part of the question which I asked was concerning the formal food retail generally. What's your opinion about the effect of the pandemic on them? Were some of them able to continue their businesses
Yeah. So when the lockdown measures were first announced, the only food retailers that could remain open were supermarkets. Alternative providers of food, such as those that provided by hawkers and spaza shops, they were all closed. There was a surge of trade on these supermarkets, long queues, especially in poor areas. You can imagine, government didn't think what would happen. Attempts to enforce social distancing in and around supermarkets by the police and by the South African National Defence Force didn't work, and there were clashes at township supermarkets. I mean, looking at these pictures, it just sends cold shivers right throughout my body. With the disappearance of the informal economy, the poor had no alternative but to buy from formal outlets, and the wealthy and those with disposable income who might otherwise support restaurants and fast food outlets are buying directly from supermarkets instead. The formal food system was protected, whilst enormous numbers of people, especially the working poor, those in the informal economy, suffered a sudden and long-term loss of income. And what we're seeing is that the COVID-19 pandemic has quickly become a hunger crisis. Daniel?
Thank you very much. It has become a hunger crisis, but some of these retailers, the big food retailers, are still making headway. Okay, thank you for that, Sheryl. So since the pandemic now, how have things changed since the pandemic, and both for retailers, for consumers, and also for your business?
Yeah, again, about 3 questions in one, but if there's just one outcome from the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa that could be considered positive, it is this. For perhaps the first time, the reality of household hunger and malnutrition has become visible to policymakers. Statistics South Africa and the National Agricultural Market Council, NAMC, they don't collect or publish detailed information on what households actually eat or what they should eat to meet minimum nutritional requirements. The latter piece of information is the bare minimum required to begin to understand malnutrition. So if you're not collecting information about the food that people eat or what they should eat to meet basic nutritional requirements, then you can't really understand malnutrition. In April, the cost of the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group that you're seeing on the screen, their basic nutritional food basket for a family of 4 persons is 2,576 Rand per month. An amount that in a normal working day month of 22 days is more than 70% of the national minimum wage. No family with 1 person earning at the national minimum wage of 20 Rand 76 an hour and working for the full month can afford adequate nutrition. So that just tells us about the state of nutrition and malnutrition in our country. It only takes basic arithmetic to calculate that the combination of income losses, price spikes, and supply chain disruptions will make nutritious food inaccessible for the poorest amongst us. Amongst the more affluent, there's been a huge surge in online food shopping as consumers minimize the risk of shopping in enclosed spaces and as they stay at home. We've seen many new businesses, Daniel, popping up, offering deliveries of local fresh food purchased from small-scale farmers. So that's been a positive, that I think small-scale farmers have been able to provide a lot of vegetables and, in some cases, fruit to online businesses. For our business, the global pandemic, I think, has brought difficulties and stresses that none of us could ever have imagined. But through it all, what we've noticed is an overwhelming sense of community. What that's translated into is a rise in consumers that are looking to support small local businesses and small brands that now need their support more than ever. Local is the new normal, and people want to get food from a trusted source. Whereas prior to lockdown, our customers were a mixture of people, some of whom were coming along for a day out to enjoy with their friends at the market. Our current customers are undoubtedly those who are prioritizing the quality of produce. They're looking for ingredients to cook with. They're looking for recipes. It seems that many people, Daniel, are now cooking proper meals from scratch, experimenting with new dishes, cooking with the kids. And what we're hoping is that the lockdown will have changed how people eat for the better. Daniel?
Thank you. Thank you for that. So my next question, I'm very sure that since the pandemic struck, you must have been thinking, wrapping your head around the way you are doing things and how you think that going forward, things can change. So going forward into the future, what's future innovations or new way of doing things do you anticipate or look forward to in your business and the farmers market and also in food retail generally?
Yeah, well, I think the future is exciting. We can't predict it, but We have to make an attempt to try and understand it. And I think one of the things that has always impressed me is the food model in Barcelona. I was lucky to go there a few years back, and I realized that they have 40 public markets throughout the city where 8,000 vendors, farmers, producers work. And they put a very high emphasis on their food markets as channels to access food by rich people, by more vulnerable communities. And typically these markets are located around highly populated and dense residential locations, allowing diverse income groups to easily access fresh produce, goods, and services by walking or biking close to home. Barcelona residents, Daniel, they rank their public markets as the second most valuable public service after their public libraries. And no matter where you are in Barcelona, you know more than 10 minutes from any one of these 40 markets. So imagine if our city could roll out some other similar models where we could have food gardens, markets in neighborhoods so that people could have access to good, healthy food. One of my dreams is to establish farmers' co-ops or food hubs that will provide farmers with support, with training, with mentorship, as well as to ensure that their produce finds a market. I think that direct marketing of products from farmers and producers to consumers offers a value chain that returns higher prices to farmers through a cooperative kind of a structure. And if I look at this hub, it could be in the city, it could be anywhere. It needs refrigeration, it needs a warehouse. You get your partner farmers supply, you get the food refrigerated and stored well, and then you start distributing it to many places, to restaurants, to hotels, to food hubs, to food clubs, through veg boxes, to markets. It's a wonderful model that often exists as a non-profit, but working with for-profit distribution organizations. Daniel?
All right, thank you very much. And do you envisage any changes when we talk about food retail generally?
Yeah, so
in the way they do things.
You mean in the future? So how will people buy?
Yes.
Well, I guess I've seen how the community action networks, CANs, and I think many of you will have heard Andrew Barrain's talk yesterday. Not yesterday, a few days ago. So I've seen the way that the community action networks and the larger food community has come together in the face of this crisis. And I've realized that there is an opportunity to not only fight back, but to potentially come out stronger on the other side. Local food systems feed communities, they drive economies, they reflect diversity, they provide nourishment, they employ countless people from farm workers to dishwashers. The small farms that form the backbone of our local food systems are in a moment of extreme vulnerability with a growing season just around the corner. Soon we're coming into spring, summer, they're going to have lots and lots of vegetables. And we're optimistic that more people in the future will recognize that in order to have a resilient supply of local food, local farmers need to be supported all year round, when times are good as well as when times are bad. So that's what we're hoping, that people will buy local and support local farmers.
Okay, thank you, Sheryl, for that. I want to ask you, what do you think consumers can do during and after the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure access to nutritious food?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we want consumers to eat healthy to boost their immune systems. Absolutely. So obviously they should buy from farmers markets, and there are quite a couple of markets around Cape Town where they can buy nutritious food from farmers direct. They can buy from neighborhood grocery shops, from small delis. They can grow their own food. Look at the photograph on the screen of the beautiful cabbages growing in old tires. They can grow food in a pot, in a backyard. You can rent an allotment. The farm has beautiful allotments in Oranjezicht. They can seed swap. They can start community gardens. I saw in Bontierville, they're clearing a piece of land now, and they're starting a community garden. So imagine, every neighborhood should have a community garden. They can start local food clubs where you buy collectively with your neighbors from small farmers and producers. So you use community-based collective bargaining to buy products in bulk, and then you distribute those amongst yourselves. You can establish what they call a CSA, very popular in America. CSA, Daniel, stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And that works where you pay the farmer up front. We tried it once with Farmer Eric. I think we were ahead of our time. But you pay the farmer up front, the farmer then buys seeds and employs people. And when the plants the crop, and when the crop is ready, it gets distributed to people who've contributed. So it's a way of helping the farmer to get going by paying the money up front. People should be more knowledgeable about the food system. It's amazing to me that people don't know where their food comes from. They haven't met farmers. They haven't learned about how hard it is to actually grow food. It's difficult, and it's a miracle when you put this little seed into the ground, Daniel, and 8 weeks later or 12 weeks later, you pull up a beautiful candy striped beetroot or a carrot. It's miraculous. And people who work in gardens, they get to understand how important it is to look after soil health. For me, the most important thing in the world is the vitality and the health of the soil. If you ask me about if a country is successful, I don't talk about GDP or, because even sick people increases GDP. I talk about soil health. That's the key to whether a country is successful or not. People can also volunteer to be part of PGS, the Participatory Guarantee System, which is a kind of accreditation system for small organic farms, which isn't expensive, where farmers and consumers visit organic farms. PGS stands for Participatory Guarantee System. So Daniel, do you think that's enough? Different ways.
I think that can work. You talked about participatory guarantee system and community support agriculture, where the community come together and rally around each other. I think they are interesting things that we should be considering. Finally, the question I'm going to ask is talking about the food system, generally in South Africa, the sustainability of the food system. And so the question is, how can food retail or retailers contribute towards ensuring a sustainable food system while also staying in business?
Yeah, so here we're really talking about the formal food system and the big retailers, the big supermarkets. And what I've noticed, Daniel, is that supermarkets have been unwilling to procure their foods from local supply chains. So from local supply chains, they impose standards and demands that are totally out of sync with small farmers. I just think that they need to think differently about how they're sourcing and where they're getting their food from. And I understand that they're national chains and it's difficult and they want the same tomatoes in each store, but I think there's got to be much more focus placed, Daniel, on sourcing locally so that farmers can supply into the large supermarkets. I think they've got to stop importing fresh produce that is not in season. We definitely don't need grapes in June. We don't need the stuff that comes in from all over the world. It's unnecessary, it's unacceptable. So that must stop straight away. And consumers must also stop buying that food. Supermarket chains, they can set up a people's pantry in each of their stores. This will be a collection system in every supermarket where consumers can donate a bag of groceries or medical supplies or essential goods that are priced ethically. And that should go to local communities via various NGOs. I think the NGOs, Daniel, have been amazing at preparing and getting food to children affected by the closure of feeding schemes at schools and at creches. They used to get a good meal when they were at school. Now that schools have closed, the NGOs have really filled that gap. All those initiatives are good, but none are sufficient. And we really saw the gap in distributing food when the pandemic and lockdown were announced. So retailers, I think they've got trucks. I see their trucks on the roads all the time. Imagine if they could help deliver food to vulnerable communities, whether for sale or for food parcels. So I think they could help with distribution. And my time is coming to an end, so I thought that I'd end off on a positive note. Somebody who I think very, very highly of is the Indian food activist Vandana Shiva. I'm sure many of you listening have read her books. And she says that we must occupy the food system to create food democracy. And what she says is that if we want a sustainable food system, it must protect our natural environment, it must sustain our farmers, and it must nourish our families. And that's food democracy. Daniel and all others listening, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Sheryl, for that. I particularly have liked your presentation and the last part where you emphasized a local food system. I think it's a good thing, and also the way you ended about food democracy. I believe in equality within the food systems where consumers, the small farmers, and even the big retailers, they will have equal say in whatever is happening in the food system. I think that is the way to go for us to have a sustainable food system. So on behalf of the Food Dialogue Summit, I want to appreciate you. I want to thank you for having the time to join us and to contribute, and for us to introduce your work, what you have been doing in the food system to us. Thank you very much, Sheryl.
Thanks, Daniel. I look forward to the panel discussion that's coming soon.